Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It is what is it now? It's the 5th of June. Holy crap, we're at the end of the first half of the year already. I guess
it's so weird.
As they say, time flies when you're having fun, I guess. Or is it more that our perception of time changes as we age?
Definitely a bit of both, but also just it's 2020 part 3.
Yeah. Man.
And 2020 never really ended, and we're all still stuck in 2020, actually.
Yeah. You know, it's speaking of 2020, back when electricity was cheaper, I was reading about how with increases of energy costs, the offset of electric cars is no longer as economically viable as it once was. The electricity costs more, and power and recharging places are not regulated, so they can just charge whatever they want for the amount of power they deliver. And
that's because electricity is using fossil fuels, so that's like a circular argument right there.
Well, of course, but the electricity itself is becoming more expensive than at private charging facilities than just running gasoline.
Well, I don't think it was ever about being cheaper either. So like the idea that like people were trying to stop buying fossil fuel burning cars to save money, I don't think that was ever actually a viable argument that anybody was making from the consumer side or the producer side. Like,
well, it was in 2015 when energy was real cheap.
I mean, again, but it's still going to be cheaper to drive a car.
Well, yeah.
Like, because that's what I'm saying. Like, because of the way, like the hybrid would still be cheaper to drive, and because
the hybrid is
fossil fuel, right? But because fossil fuel is the basis for the factories that are, or the
all power generation,
the electrical, really. Yeah. So at the core, the fossil fuel is like, if you can buy that at the cheapest rate possible, at the most efficient use, cutting out the coal or gas-powered plant between the charger is like effective in the same way as the infrastructure that's currently in place. Because that's where...
Well, sure. If you had enough space to develop a like 40,000 kilowatt hour solar array in your backyard, sure, you might be able to charge your car pretty reasonably and have reasonable range if you a pure electric vehicle. But that's not practical.
Right, because they keep us in a manufactured consent cycle where then they're like, oh, we didn't upgrade our power grid and we're still using fossil fuels on a grid that was built over 100 fucking years ago. And we haven't actually updated it. So because of that, it's actually cheaper to just drive the gas-powered car, which, like the hybrid, it was still mostly cheaper than the electric-powered vehicle because the charging price was like claimed to be a certain rate, but it only lasted that way for a very limited amount of time, which does not, it's like over X amount of miles, not just per year, as how these things are rated. So it's like it's always basically been more fuel efficient or more economic to just stay with like a hybrid and not go to electric, because the electricity still ended up costing almost as much. It wasn't like so significantly cheaper that it was like, oh, the electric, because if it was that much cheaper, then the car companies would have switched it because they would have had no choice. But because
it wasn't actually... That's the real issue.
And it's the oil companies, and that's why I mean they're keeping us locked in this cycle because they're pointing at profitability as the thing that should be the preventer, when actually that was never going to be able to be more profitable as long as they stayed on fossil fuel energy production.
And it's just further compounded by the increase in cost of coal and oil and the lack of investment into alternative energy generation. When was it last month or something like that? California generated a surplus of energy from renewable sources, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Like they had bonus energy from all of their wind farms and solar arrays.
Yeah.
Like, holy
And
crap.
I think they might have been at the same time that Texas was like taxing and breaking their own energy grid, and people were dying because they couldn't keep their fucking AC on. And then they're like, oh, we need more Bitcoin miners to make our energy grid better. Like, that makes no fucking sense.
So, speaking of Bitcoin, this is a real quick off topic. Apparently in Massachusetts, a person was leaving their residence, the apartment they'd been renting, and they expected to get a full deposit back, a security deposit. And they got instead of the $3,000 deposit, they got a $1,400 return. And so they inquired as to what happened. Apparently, the homeowner put their deposit into Bitcoin, and it lost value. So,
I mean,
this is a thing.
Be legal.
It's not. It's completely illegal. Like Massachusetts, apparently Massachusetts rental code requires that the monies be returned in the same currency they were issued. So
that makes more sense.
This person's going to have to come off, and of course the idea that this person was going to turn a profit on Bitcoin and then not share the profit from the money that wasn't theirs. Holy shit.
But those are the type of people that do that shit, man. They don't understand they're playing a zero or negative sum game.
Well,
and they think that they're just creating money.
So here's one example that's been turned up on the internet. A landlord did some shady shit and they got caught. If there's one, these are like fucking cockroaches. So if there's one, there are hundreds, if not thousands. We've got 300 million people in this country. There are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who have done some shady shit regarding Bitcoin, and they're not telling the people whose money they're playing with. This is like a stock market scandal all over again. But whatever, we don't.
Well, and now the a former OpenSea employee has been indicted in the first ever case of NFT insider trading. So this is like the biggest NFT platform in the crypto space. One of the people got caught and charged with fucking insider trading. So
that's no
like you said, if there's one, they're like cockroaches. He's not the only one.
No.
How did he get away with it within the organization? You mean nobody fucking caught on? Nope, not one person?
You're telling me that this guy is like the Class A elite hacker of the organization, and they just circumvented every single security protocol and best practice that was in place, like all of the security protocols that are designed to track who's doing what on the network. They just bypassed all of that shit because they're that good, but yet they got caught. Must not be that good.
Well, Nathaniel Chastain is being charged with 1 count of wire fraud, 1 count of money laundering, in connection with a scheme to commit insider trading in non-fungible tokens.
Yeah, so that sounds like some accounting shit. That doesn't sound like some Class A elite hacker shit.
No, it was just insider trading.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same Wall Street bullshit. None of these people are smart.
That's what I mean. All of this stuff had to have been allowed because all of those transactions should have been recorded on their system. Should have been. These bastards. They can't even make a decent slot machine without trying to dip their hand into the pot before it's time. They're going to get 13% no matter what. That's how Vegas does it. They get 13% just period. And that's more than enough to cover all of their overhead.
The U.S. Attorney Damian Williams says NFTs might be new, but this type of criminal scheme is not.
Oh.
getting dunked on by the fucking U.S. attorney for not being original with your criminal schemes.
For being,
you took a big fucking L. That's a huge fucking L because each of those counts is up to 20 years.
Oh,
and his reputation's fucked.
Oh,
who's hiring this guy now? Who's fucking hiring this guy? Say he gets off.
Russia.
I mean, yeah.
That's like that's where
if he can get there.
That's where scorched careers go to reduce to ember. Like Kaspersky is getting their software removed from the volume licenses of like every major manufacturer I've read. They're all like real worried about it because Russia. Even though Kaspersky's software has been like reliable for the last, I don't know, 30 years.
I mean, it has, but nobody checks it. So that was the problem. Yeah. This is like inherently the problem. So it doesn't matter if it's reliable or not because nobody was checking anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I got to admit, I didn't use it. I used like Clamex AV or lately.
The issue is you have to know if your risk and vulnerability indices are up to date every minute, basically.
Yeah.
Because the time between a 0-day vulnerability and a 0-day attack is basically dependent upon access to the knowledge about the 0-day vulnerability. And that's where like 0-day attacks can be prevented with knowledge.
Yeah, and then there's a countdown to how long it takes for the team to code a patch.
Right,
and then distribution and deployment and whether or not it's adopted in time. And it might be deployed, but it might take like weeks for full adoption to protect an entire global network of computers.
The issue is it didn't even matter that Kaspersky was reliable because nobody was checking the fucking databases.
Yeah.
So it's like all these things have problems because nobody was taking cybersecurity seriously as they should have been. But now that all of these vulnerabilities have gone unchecked for so long and they've been exploited at the highest levels.
I mean, realistically, like I have the most basic training in cybersecurity, and I admit it's really difficult unless you're on the inside to even keep up with it because you're always waiting for somebody to report on something. And so it's tough. If you're not in cybersecurity industry and you're not like reading, daily memos and updates, you're not even on the front lines. It's just like waiting for instructions. It's like a game of hurry up and wait so you can ensure that, if your computer system is like, even a target. And that's the other thing. I think a significant portion of the population, they're targets because they have wallets, but they're not targets for like the data that they're keeping, like, documents that they authored when they were in college or pictures they took on their vacation. I mean, occasionally someone falls into one of those ransomware traps where they encrypt your data and they're like, "Hey, give us some money." But
that's the problem. You can't say that because a lot of people are, because those people have way more money than somebody in like fucking Manila who has internet access and a bunch of fucking old ass smartphones that they can run a spam farm with and like trap some young stupid 18-year-old into spending his parents' money on some fucking fake girlfriend. Like, so yeah, those people, it's like there are so many lines of vulnerability that it's like you don't want to acknowledge them all because then it just sounds like complete paranoia. But it's like, I don't. This kid recently.
True. I'm just not the target for the 18-year-old girlfriend in Manila.
Exactly what I was about to say is this kid recently killed himself because he got scammed in a sex ransom thing, and he was like sending nude pics to a farm that he thought was a girl, and then they started asking him for money, and they kept asking him for money, so he fucking killed himself. So like, this is a real. Like, people being on the internet does inherently make them targets because everyone has somebody who's poorer than them and more desperate than them when you have fucking 7 billion people.
No, I'm actually glad that you mentioned that. There's a website that my dad showed me where you enter in like essentially what you own, like your home, your cars, all that stuff, and your annual income, and it just ranks you. And I was actually quite surprised with where it ranked me. There's things that I don't even consider, but most people in America are doing so much better than even the poorest people in America are still doing better than a significant portion of the world's population in terms of equity. And it's kind of scary when we put it into perspective, when we think of like, oh yeah, we've got this huge problem, when it's really just one of like distribution. It's not really an economic issue, except that we've created it.
Yeah, and it's like, it's not to say that the exploitation is always coming from outside. It's just that the internal exploitation, it looks different.
Yeah.
It looks completely different. It comes in the form of minimum wage now being less than a gallon of gasoline in many places around the country. So that's the type of thing where you're like, if you're not making minimum wage, you don't think about that. But suddenly when the gas prices have risen to a point where somebody who's making minimum wage, well, they can't buy a fucking electric car anyway. So that idea of them like somehow bootstrapping their way out of the minimum wage job and the minimum wage car,
I mean,
that's bullshit.
If they're paying taxes, they're subsidizing somebody's electric car purchase. So they are kind of buying an electric car.
True, but then the idea that this person there's no public transportation as an option either in most places. So like that person has to have a car. So they have to have a shitty car that's always on the verge of breakdown because they can't afford to get a newer one. So we're perpetually putting parts of society in these indentured servitude,
it's
indefinite
like
loops. It's complete serfdom, but they're indefinite loops that you don't realize are there if you're not stuck in them, because they come in the form of tax code. They come in the form of home loans. They come in the form of like, who can get mortgages, how much mortgage you can get. Can you get fucking cash up front with your mortgage? Like, dude, nobody in their life has ever offered me cash up front with a mortgage. Even when I was making $40 an hour on paper, they were like, we're not actually going to be able to give you a mortgage unless it's in the projects. So it's like the redlining is how this shit manifests. And then like it makes it seem as if we're not being attacked because the targets are not obvious and the attacks are institutional. So we don't even see them when they're happening internally. So it's like only when there's like an external attack do we then even really start to become aware that these things are even happening. I as far as I can tell. Because it doesn't seem to me like America realizes their finances and their class has been under attack for the last 50 years, basically starting with Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan.
Mortgages are facilitated by local lenders, right? I mean, are there like mortgage houses that exist
who get their money from the federal fucking government?
So,
I mean, not the government, the fucking Federal Reserve. I'm sorry, not to conflate those two things, because this is where, in theory, the Federal Reserve is a good thing that's meant to not have a political ideology running how that money's being allocated. But when you realize it's heavily fucking white supremacist, it doesn't even, like, there's no left or right wing, it's just white supremacist anymore. Then you realize the Federal Reserve is just perpetuating white mediocrity as the superior caste, even though the white man isn't the most affluent demographic in America anymore. So that's where there's this whole thing of like keeping up appearances as if the white status is like still the top. It's not even the top in America anymore, bro. Fucking Asian people, and because of the way that they get lumped together in the fucking, like, you couldn't tell if they're necessarily Chinese, Japanese, or Korean, or Vietnamese for that matter, because the fucking census just lumps them all together. So Asian Americans are now more affluent, because this is another issue. By like Watering
I've seen
everybody.
breakdowns of Asian affluence, and the distribution is not like
It's not even.
no, it's
It's
not at
not,
all.
especially when you include Indians.
Once you
Um,
include India, but like Southeast Asia makes the chart look really disproportionate,
mhm.
extremely
So
disproportionate.
that's why. But that's their racism coming back to bite them in the ass. That's the issue here because they lumped everybody all together. Now, when you accumulate those things with a smaller population, it actually puts them as a group higher than white males. So that's why it's clearly like an accidental outcome. They were not trying to make these charts so that the Asian male is the most affluent person in America.
Well, well,
That's not what they were trying to
well,
do.
I mean,
Most definitely
surely
not.
they have some like PhD statisticians at, at the census, right? Who can like, actually manage the volume of numbers that they've got to put together to draw these conclusions, right? I'm just making a broad assumption here. I would hope that there were some people who were absolute like top of their field functioning at the in the Census Bureau managing these kind of statistics because the shit's
Have you taken
important.
a census?
Yeah, it was pretty terrible
It's
actually.
fucking horrible.
Yeah,
The questions are absurd. There's like no distinction
it's
between
not nuanced at all.
uh
It's
like a lot of different ethnicities that they then get lumped together into like Arab American
I
or
I
Arabic or
I
something.
got the
And it's
impression
like,
that it was created for a like a I'm gonna be real generous, like a fifth grade reading level.
yeah, and in that it's meant to be for a racist fifth grader that's trying to learn stereotypes about people that may not even be the ones they're trying to stereotype. Because this is how you end up with Americans not knowing the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim, as if we should like have a reason to articulate. But then you have Americans committing hate crimes against Sikhs, thinking they're acting out against Muslims. So there's this weird, like xenophobic lumping that is the byproduct of these horrible categories that I was trying to get to at the crux of like Asian American is such a like nebulous concept when you really break it down. Like there's so many different types of Asian Americans. For them to lump it together as Asian American male is,
Well,
is clearly terrible science.
that was one of the things that I remember being pushed pretty heavily when I was taking some anthropology courses. That it was all ethnicity. That race was this, really dated byproduct of poor science, like barely science. And that if we really wanted to be honest about it, we have to talk about ethnicity and geographic location. We can't really talk about race in the sense that it was originally intended, because that's just inaccurate. And unfortunately, that didn't really seem to stick. I think there's like a small scholastic window where there are people who still use ethnicity over race when they're trying to talk about problems like this. But it's like it doesn't even matter. I can't even do it all the time, because at some point it requires nuance, and not all the nuance isn't something that can be manifested with a lot of dialogue on the internet. Even when it's coming from some journalist who is supposed to be, known for covering this kind of material. I read stuff on the internet, and I probably shouldn't. But I read reporting on the internet. It's just, with all the shootings, and I'm gonna just change subjects real quick, but with all the shootings and the reporting on it, and it's all like the numbers keep changing because they get updates, and I get it, but I don't need to know, like, it's not a fucking scorecard. It's not like keeping track of the score of the baseball game or the football game or the whatever sports ball game that's happening. It's and then to make it worse, like there isn't even like an honest dialogue about regulating firearms, because everyone's already made up their mind, because everyone's already an expert, but nobody seems to want to look at data. And we're at the point where we're like, I mean, children are deciding the regulation of firearms, and apparently they're letting kids die over it. So
I blame Joe Rogan specifically for a lot of what you just said.
there isn't even an attempt at listening to people while they try to just get through the trauma, just even process some of the trauma, there's always some fucking child on the internet who doesn't want to give up their guns, or like they won't even engage in a meaningful dialogue. And it makes me think, like, I wonder how pissed off they're going to be when a decision is rendered and they just weren't part of the dialogue, and their ideas weren't part of the discussion because they already made up their mind and they weren't willing to even talk to people.
Here's the thing. So much of the white identity has come down to owning a gun and preparing for a mythical zombie apocalypse or mythical Red Dawn because of the fact that they're not doing anything, that those hopes for becoming someone as a nationalist patriot in their own mind is the only thing a lot of white people have left. That's the whole clinging to their guns thing triggering them, ironically. Because I remember when Obama said they cling to their guns, they fucking got triggered and lost their fucking minds. We don't cling, no, motherfucker. That's literally what you're doing. That is literally what you're doing. So the idea that they all got triggered about that specific statement, it wasn't even a bill. It was just a statement. And then the way that rap became a channel for that culture to go into the hood, because if you remember, I don't know if you knew anything about hip hop before that, it was conscious, and breakdance was being used as a means of an alternate form of bringing down walls between gangs other than just killing and fighting. So like what was happening?
Oh yeah, that was the point of the battle.
And that got replaced actively by music companies. That whole scene when Will Smith was doing songs, Summertime, Parents Just Don't Understand, fucking Sugar Hill Gang, is not to say that Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's message wasn't real, but that wasn't like pushing, it was anti-gun, if anything. So like there's this whole thing about the message of anti-gun violence in hip-hop music being basically bought out at the highest levels. And now we know it for certain, because then you find like people like Too Short who were trying to be conscious rappers, but the studio execs paid him to be a pimp on record. And it's like, well, yeah, of course there's always going to be some fucking person who's going to sell out everybody just to line their own pockets and then feel bad about it fucking 20 years later. Of course there's always going to be that douchebag. But the impact that it's made on American culture, and then by proxy making it seem as if hip-hop culture is like tied into gun culture, that's fucking completely absurd nonsense that was bought into. That shit, and the drugs and the like pill popping, like you can specifically see in early 2000s when rappers start talking about pills and Percocet and Molly Percocet. What the fuck are you saying this shit for, bro? Why are you talking about this shit? Nobody wants. So you can see a clear line of lyrics that had no mention of like pharmaceutical drugs, and then suddenly they're talking about benzodiazepine and rhyming that with
Man, I remember listening to De La Soul. I listened to De La Soul and The Coup and Black Sheep when I was in high school, and all of that was very socially conscious rap, like very, very socially conscious. They talked about things like single mothers raising children, or being good fathers, or like what it actually means to run a business. And a lot of these things were very interesting to me, like conceptually, because this is a reflection of urban culture, of city culture, and that I didn't really have any access to. But then I slowly remember watching, like, MTV, especially, like, start featuring more music that sounded like hip hop, but it was definitely rap music. But it was all about cars and money and shit that was like, that doesn't. It just seemed like such a stark shift. It was almost like the difference between like a politically conscious rock and then glam rock. Like,
the way to describe it.
I mean, it's the glam rap stuff, and that was so like off-putting to me because I didn't care about what they were talking about.
I mean, you can see it with Tupac. His early work, Tupacalypse Now, he's talking about his mother's Black Panther shit and other Black Panther shit. And then when he goes to Death Row, it's like gangster this and gangster that. We all know you went to fucking art school, bro. Like, don't paint this picture for young kids to look up to that you know is a fucking lie, and then have that lie be what gets you killed because you had no business painting that picture of yourself, because nobody should be painting that picture of themselves. So it's this weird, like, I struggle with people like Tupac and Biggie and Diddy, but then you have people like Ludacris who you don't have any struggle with, because then you look at the shit he's done and why he's basically not been in the news is because he was doing philanthropic shit, and they don't report when rappers do philanthropic shit, bro. Like, I'm saying, you don't have to do it now. Anybody listen to me, go look up Ludacris philanthropy between like 2000 and now. It's like it's ridiculous how much shit he's done that hasn't really been like lauded or reported on as much as it should be, because that's not our public has been so primed for the negative, the who's like defamation trial, the like I mean the negative sells better, but this is why news shouldn't be behind a paywall in the first place, in that the idea that the news outlets are publishing what sells then creates this perpetual cycle of negative bullshit, because nobody wants to buy stories about Ludacris setting up a fucking school because it makes them feel bad. It actually makes them feel bad about themselves. They want to read about other people in worse situations so they feel better. So I'm not sure if that psychological outcome is what we're trying to do with news. And in that, the history of the newspaper is like it's too associated with slavery for my personal taste. Like the idea of recording the ships coming into port, and they'll be, it was just for no. You can't be shipping people and acting like reporting on the fucking ship coming into port is about the fucking mangoes. It wasn't about the fucking mangoes. They might have published the shit about the mangoes, but they were concerned when the people shipments were coming into port. So news cycles and newspapers being associated with that explicitly is enough for me to be like, okay, we can just be done with this altogether and do something completely different. But the way that there is actually somewhat of a history of empiricism informing the journalism very briefly, it makes me think that it can work, but it only worked for a small period in history. So like, I don't, like, to me, as someone who looks at history and like analyzes it for myself, journalism has not been for anything but propaganda most of the time of its existence. It's never been fucking objective. Like, the idea that journalism is somehow objective, that's a fucking lie. It was never objective. People, come on. If we're like really romanticizing journalists and journalism as having some like
journalism has to be biased because it's told from a perspective.
Yeah, but then they make it seem as if there's like some sort of Hippocratic oath binding journalists from having a perspective.
But
And
that's
then
just
you get
marketing.
these. It is, because then you get these fucking Keith Olbermans who go on MSNBCs and then you find out, oh, I don't actually vote. What the fuck are you pushing all this like contra Republican bullshit for that basically keeps people stuck in these same Republican Democratic arguments that don't get anything done, when it's because they like, just tell me you fucking vote for Hillary, bro. Then I'll trust you more than, oh, I didn't vote. Well, you want to vote for somebody. You in your heart of hearts, you tell me you have no inclination to vote because you're abstaining. Bullshit. I don't buy it from anyone. There's no human on the fucking planet that has like a functioning system in line with how we all function in society that would be able to be exposed to a stimulus and not respond to it. They literally proved it with the fucking white elephant test, bro. If you tell somebody don't think about the white elephant, the first thing they fucking do is imagine a fucking white elephant, because you made it impossible for them not to fucking think about a goddamn white elephant. That's literally been proven. So it's like, there's nobody who can, oh no, I did not imagine the white elephant when you just said that. Bullshit. So can we just get past the idea that these journalists are magically able to not conjure the white elephant?
Oh, I mean, obviously they're so like ethically advanced. I'm sorry. Obviously they're so ethically advanced that they can see through the implicit bias within the story and report just the facts as they happen, because nobody can withstand just raw data, and that's what they would have to do. It would just be raw data, like timestamps, events, no narrative. The narrative is really what kills me, because the narrative is the most biased objective version or subjective version of the story that exists.
And this is where the rush to be first undermines accuracy. At the crux of this is the problematic journalistic in this era inclination for the rush to be first rather than the rush to be most accurate. And I think at this point, it's feeding the inability of people to accurately weed through information, that whether it's credible or not. But it's not because they don't know to look for a name. They just don't know how to read anything critically because they were never taught. And people in America are made to think that if you just become an adult, those things are innate. Like time management is just innate. Money management is just innate. That's an inherent thing you gain with becoming an adult. And because they make it seem like these things aren't specially acquired skills that need training to be executed, then that's where we get people thinking they can do research when they've never been informed how to look at anything critically, let alone an article critically, or something that's meant to be a piece of published information, which when you look at a lot of Associated Press publications, you can tell by the way that they construct it that they don't have a lot of information when they're putting out the shit, and they really have no business putting the story out, but they're just trying to get clicks and trying to get traffic. So like, look at this shooting. We don't know if anybody's dead, but we know people got shot, more at 11. And it's like, well, that was really unfucking helpful. They just got my attention briefly enough to tell me they don't have enough information to tell me the whole story right now. That's fucking bullshit.
How much of
the
internet economy do you think is comprised of click-based ad revenue?
Most of it. In fact, they just did a study. The internet isn't even mostly human anymore. It's mostly bots. It's like 60% bots and only 30% humans now. And a lot of these bots are
Wait, what's the remaining 10%?
I mean, it's like they're not going to be able to tell because of the activity. So it's probably like margin of error.
Okay.
But again, it's like a lot of these bots are writing comments and they're writing stories and they're publishing blogs, and people don't know the fucking difference because they've never learned how to like judge a regular person's language, let alone a bot. And then you get a fucking 18-year-old talking to a chat bot, trading sex pics with a chat bot because they're caught in a phishing scam that's meant to catch irrational, impulsive, highly sexualized, highly libido-induced attention. And anybody on the internet who's in that mindset can get caught in that trap with, if they don't know what a chatbot looks like or sounds like, they'll think they're talking to a real person, and then they'll feel really fucking dumb. And then they'll never tell anybody about that because they got caught in a sex chatbot. So like that kid, he's not the only one that happened to. He's just the first one in recent times that we're really hearing about, which is where I'm like, if it's happening to kids, it's definitely happening to boomers. If it's happening to kids, there's no way these adult people on the internet fucking yelling about like trans people and women's wombs in ways they have no business doing aren't getting caught in these traps too. They are not savvy enough. So I refuse to believe that those people are not escaping these traps, which is where I think those traps are more meant to catch those types of people, because when you set traps for those types of people, you don't feel bad for taking their money. So when other people get caught in the trap, it's like an innocent bystander for a target that wasn't even meant to go into the trap. And that's where I'm saying, like, a lot of the people being targeted cause innocent bystanders because the person targeting is not even informed that innocent bystander exists, because the information they're being presented with is also propaganda for one way or another. So it's like, in their minds, it's only fat, rich white people living here and not like oppressed brown and indigenous, black and brown indigenous people of color and oppressed people stuck in a system that's perpetuating those white people shipping that shit out of the country. And because they make us invisible, then we get caught in their fucking traps that are meant to go for the oppressive white man. And then they turn that shit around and recruit kids to go attack those people because they're doing cyber attacks on us. And you got to protect the homeland. So it's this big information cycle that keeps people exploited and exploitable for the sake of using that exploitation to create the xenophobic other, even though that exploitation vulnerability was left open by the people who are then going to turn around and use it and say, oh, this is why we need to go attack these people. Because that's literally the same argument. What I just described is how conspiracy theorists describe how 9/11 happened. Did our government just let it happen? Kind of. Did they know about most of it before it happened? Kind of.
Oh, I mean, clearly we need to go bomb someone, right?
I mean, but the issue is the way that the things that we knew that they knew about could then also be presented in a way that if you argue it a certain way, it's not actually actionable evidence, because there's so many bomb threats, because there's so many fucking death threats, and they don't do anything about all of the other ones, that it just gets lumped into shit. Oh, it's just another death threat. We're not going to do anything. It's just another bomb threat. There's not a credible bomb threat. So,
yeah, the guy that killed the judge who had the list of governors and McConnell,
exactly.
He didn't issue threats. He just went and killed someone. Did he? Did he? I mean, I couldn't find anything else about it. I didn't look very hard. All I read was like the.
I'm pretty sure he did, and it was known that he was trying to kill that person.
Oh, well,
I'm fairly positive it was known.
Well, then he fucking went through with it.
Which is why it was, I mean, any time that happens is like a horrible failure, but I think it was even like he went and purchased the gun that day or something.
Oh, yeah.
So it was like he got the gun. One of these fucking shootings, somebody got the gun the same fucking day they did it. So it's like too impossible to even keep up with all this bullshit anymore. In the sense of like, when Americans are overwhelmed with something, they just turn themselves off to it. I've been American for too long to not know the American reaction to being overwhelmed, and it's literally just heads in the sand, ass in the air. And it's like, for whatever reason, this idea of like the rebellious American is only meant to be against zombies and Russians. And even then, they do it through Ukrainians. So like, they're not even fighting Russians. Everybody knows it's a fucking proxy war. Everybody in America knows it's a proxy war. Everybody in Russia knows it's a proxy war. Nobody wants this shit to be happening. So we're all like, I can't fathom being a person with no influence over nuclear weapons that doesn't have to constantly worry about looking out the window and seeing a mushroom cloud because two little fucking small dicked guys are like really, and it's not meant to be a joke. This is if you really think about everybody's existence, this is what we all have to fucking deal with every goddamn day. Every goddamn day. It can happen in the middle of the night. It can happen right now. These two small dick fucking assholes could decide it's all just gone. That is too much fucking power for any person, any group to have over our own species. I can't even believe I have to say that shit. But it's because people have become so used to not thinking about it, because then we have to think about gun violence when we're going to the grocery store. It's like the ability to compartmentalize trauma is the American superpower. And by proxy, it's a whole lot of paralysis that prevents any actionable outcomes, because then you get like, if you look at the civil rights movement, everything that it accomplished has basically been eroded. It literally has had highways built over it actively, in the same way that the fucking the fuck is that? Mount Rush fucking stupid Moor destroyed a native monument. Yeah, fuck that. Fuck Mount Rushmore. Or
forefathers or whatever.
They do this shit to remind the people that they are in control and can break it down at any moment. That's all it's for. Fuck Mount Rushmore. All this shit is meant to be symbols to keep us subconsciously paralyzed when we're, as Americans, meant to revere these things as if they're not symbols of fucking destruction. And that's why when you have to call out white supremacist infrastructure and the institution, otherwise you're still wrapped up in their framing. Because that's
we destroyed their culture. Revere them.
Yeah. Why are there so many fucking Greek columns and shit? Why are we so obsessed with like Roman gods and we can absorb and assimilate something else? Let's do it. Yeah. Fucking African people. Well, we'll take the work, we'll take the labor, but pretend that we didn't steal all their fucking information. We'll just pretend that didn't happen. Oh, no. We only stole from Chinese people because Chinese people are mentally superior to Africans. They do this shit to fucking keep these goddamn stereotypes built in. It's like the way the colonial perspective just completely permeates every aspect of culture. It's like, there's no way this shit is, over time, it's like impossible to escape when that is the dominant paradigm. And that's where,
I've seen pictures of Africa, of cities throughout Africa, like real big cities. and they are indistinguishable from the real big cities in the United States. And I've seen parts of the United States that are indistinguishable from what I believe to be the poorest of the poorest regions of insert anywhere on Earth. So it's
that's
so
true.
surreal because
the problem is the reason those cities were built to look like that is because of imperialism.
Well, no, my point is though that there are places in Africa that are just as modern and advanced and have technology.
Like that framing. Like just as modern that still puts the white aesthetic higher.
Okay,
even though they are. How can white people be the modern paradigm when the fucking cradle of civilization is there?
Well,
that doesn't even make sense.
I'm thinking more along the lines of like Tokyo or Shanghai, but we'll go with America. Even still, these are technologically sophisticated cities that have really advanced economic systems. They have advanced supply chains. They have advanced everything. You can go to the industrial sector and build all sorts of crazy stuff out of nearly any material that you want because it's not limited to America or China or Russia. These things can be manufactured anywhere where they have sufficient technology. And then there are places in America where it's literally a dust bowl and there isn't any economic activity because there's no intelligence, there's no education, there's no infrastructure at all even. And that's not unique to America. That exists everywhere. There's always some place in some country, no matter how sophisticated they are, there's a spot that has no economic activity. It's not like, and so I understand. There's the framing of it all is essentially the problem. There's this horrible marketing campaign to paint portions of the world as dirt poor and unsophisticated and lacking technology and all these things, but that's just like inaccurate.
Even then, it's like a lot of the modern city structures have been built by Chinese and African engineers. So it's like, even so, the farther east you go, the less. I mean, it's not homogenous, but it's like the less Western influence you start to see in the like bigger city structures. And it's like it looks completely different from our cities in a way that I think is like not necessarily better, but it's different enough that then I'm like, okay, modernity can't be on one culture standard when there's different types of modernity, but that framing is like almost impossible to get to when Western culture defines itself as the pinnacle of modernity. And it has done that explicitly for the last 400 years. So that's where it's like, you didn't do it, but Western modernity tried to declare itself the paragon of modernity to the world for the last 400 years, obviously incorrectly. But this is like the internal struggle between the fucking Church of England and, there's all these things happening where these different entities are trying to declare itself the paragon of culture and the paragon of the global information center. And America explicitly has done that for like the last 50, 60 years in a way that necessitated explicit barbaricization of all of Africa as a homogenous entity, the complete invisibility of the indigenous population within America, the resurrection of the dog of China, and then the continuous, perpetual separation between Japanese and Chinese culture as if one is inherently thieving and the other is inherently creative, when that's been proven to be not true at all. So there's a lot of things that American culture specifically did. So when you're like thinking of Japan as modern, well, that's because American culture has portrayed Japan as in the future for like the last 30 years as like a racist fuck you to China, who they say stole all that shit from Japan whenever they have it in China. And everything that China has is just a Japanese knockoff. So that like,
what's funny about that is in most science fiction that I've read, it's not Japan that leads in the future. It's Chinese culture.
Yeah, but that's like that's literature versus like film or
even in film,
anime.
like Shanghai and Tokyo are to me indistinguishable from Blade Runner. Like they both have that look.
I mean, but it's meant to be dystopian, so it's not meant to be good. So that's why I'm saying, like, there's a difference between there's a difference between Wakanda and Los Angeles fucking 2049 in Blade Runner. So there's like a dystopian future and a utopian future. Like, I'm not talking about dystopian. Like, there's tons of dystopian Japanese futurism that looks cool, but it's still dystopian. I'm not talking about Akira. Akira's dystopian as fuck. Japan is not that's not a good portrayal. Or like Ghost in the Shell. Japan is dystopian as fuck. That's we
portraying. We shouldn't.
So that's Ghost I'm not talking about those
Akira.
things even. So that's where I'm saying, like, in the mainstream lay culture, it's literally a thing in America to perpetuate the difference between Japanese technology and Chinese technology. Is Japanese create it and Chinese steal it. That's literally where the fucking...
it's interesting about that is Japan can't produce enough electricity for the electric cars that they need to deploy to their citizens. And meanwhile, China is generating or building power plants. And
building better EVs.
Building better electric vehicles. And not just that, but deploying an electric charging infrastructure. And they're also retraining like their technical population to service electric vehicles. They're doing it all now. They're not waiting for some date way off in the future to start mobilizing. They already started mobilizing. I think when I think of a modern society, actually, I think of China because they have such a vast public transportation system. And granted, it has they have their own flaws with how it works, but they also have more high-speed rail than anywhere. And they have bus and taxi and electric vehicles and charging. They're doing so many things that it's just like, man, what's the first step? What was the first step that they took to get that ball rolling? Because that's all we really need, right? You'd think? Is it really?
Even in modern times, the propaganda is so strong, the first place your mind goes for modern is Japan. That's what I mean. Like, bro, it's none of our fault. We are subconsciously trained to believe these things from before we were born, because the propaganda is so baked into this culture at various points, where it's like you can see where they like stopped calling Japanese people that horrible slur and then started to refer to them in this like romanticized, like, oh, Emperor Hirohito and like all this stuff, and like the Japanese Budo and Bushido and the warrior spirit. No, we love how honorable you are now. And it's like the stark contrast between how they were just lumped together, but now we're going to use them to create a division because they saw that they were already doing that. And the Japanese were willing to go along with that perpetual division if it meant they were going to gain new allies and like who were going to sing praises about them. So it's like, I don't necessarily blame Japan for continuing along a track that it was on and joining up with America. But history has proven there's been some, questionable shit happening on the modernization front concerning how things appear to be democratic, but they are truly oligarchic when you look at the breakdown of subsidies and how governments end up distributing contracts. And that is the crux of when all these countries do the appearance of democracy, but then they're running with like the Elon Musks basically dictating everything.
Oh, so speaking of Lord Elon, apparently he's trying to cull his employee roster. That was the whole point of his. Everyone's got to come in for 40 hours a week. If you want to work from home, you have to put in 40 hours a week in the office, like in the state that you're actually working in. Apparently, And so
some people called that out.
Yeah.
And there was pushback saying, oh, no, there's no way he's doing that. And sure enough, that news came out.
What a weird way to fire people. Why not just show up until they decide to let you go? At least that way you get a severance package. But quitting?
This is someone who's clearly trying to manipulate stocks.
Yeah.
And manipulate the market. And that's the only thing, Elon hasn't actually delivered on anything in the last 5 years that he's promised.
Model Y, right? That came out.
But it got recalled. Everything.
They all got recalled.
Yeah. So somebody did the breakdown. It's basically costing Tesla, or the way that their market capitalization works, they're roughly making $1 million profit per car to support the market cap, whereas other companies like General Motors and Ford would only have to make like $9,000 per vehicle to support their market cap. So the numbers clearly do not add up.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And that's not how profitability
are the components of these vehicles being sold as NFTs or something?
Here's the thing. What Tesla doesn't publicize is they make most of their money selling carbon credits.
Oh yeah, I was aware of that, but
the implications of that for a car company. Think about that. You're a car company, but most of your profits are made from selling carbon credits. When your output doesn't. Yeah, and your output doesn't match the number of credits that you're selling for. So they're selling effectively $1 million worth of carbon credits for $100,000 car.
Are they getting carbon credits for the amount of crap they're pumping into outer space or low orbit?
That's why SpaceX is a separate entity, bro. This is why he didn't put them all together, because as you're alluding to, the way that they're getting around emissions standards and emissions laws, if he put the companies together, because SpaceX is in America, he would not be able to claim that carbon neutral status, because then you find out the rockets put so much carbon into the atmosphere that it like Elon doing fossil fuel based rockets offsets his electric car company. It's fucking stupid. It's zero sum.
I think we could fairly say with certain degree of certainty that just launching like maybe 2 or 3 just obliterated any carbon neutrality gains made by any car.
They've done the math. It doesn't have to be speculation. It's not a question. It does, and that's what I mean.
But I think I bet it's like a really low number, like 2 launches. That's more carbon than
one.
One is more carbon than like every car that Tesla will ever manufacture.
No, not okay. When we're talking about like every car they'll ever manufacture, it's probably more like
3 or 4, 5 launches.
No, probably more like 100. Okay. But then you find here's the problem. You find out 1 in every 100 rocket launches fails versus 1 in every 5.4 million flights. So when we're talking about the efficacy of the rocket just doesn't have like as sound of a chance of surviving its trip as an airplane, to the extent that one is more than likely 1 out of every 100 SpaceX rockets will fail, and it's been more than that so far. So the 1 out of 100 is like all rockets. SpaceX's is way higher. So this is where it's like then they're destroying rockets and putting fucking hundreds of millions of pounds of carbon in the atmosphere in one failed launch. So it's like the idea that the guy who runs the electric car company can also run a fossil fuel power.
His Starship is being delayed again because it's it's probably not. I bet that thing doesn't last. I bet it gets up into space a couple times, then it starts breaking down, and they can't continue their program because they only built 2 of them.
They couldn't keep it in space for more than 48 hours and keep the toilet working. That's not a good sign. Like, if you can't get your plumbing to work on a 48-hour space flight, nobody's getting to fucking Mars.
Hey,
those engineers ain't getting nobody to Mars, not a human.
Hey guys, shit in this bucket while I fix the toilet. Oh.
Yeah, they had to cut that trip short. So, man, it's I love seeing the facade fall apart, but I'm just interested.
This shit costs so many resources that like they were never gonna get back. Every time they launch something foolishly that doesn't return something measurable, it's just like, oh, there was X amount of shit we just pumped into the atmosphere and a whole bunch of material we're never gonna get back.
That's true, but then apparently we had to go through all this dumb shit to prove you can't just buy your way
into space
out of
flight?
A problem.
Oh, God.
Out of any problem, whether it's like solar panels or like the fucking electric vehicle or the space flight. He's tried to buy his way out of every problem. And then when analyzed by experts, every solution that he's come up with is patently ridiculous on its head. Because then you're like, so they're doing levitation in a vacuum tube. So
what did the Atlassian executive officer say about Elon's announcement? It was like highly regressive or something like that, or for those that don't know, Atlassian creates project management software, like world-class project management software.
Yeah, and there's too much stuff to dunk on for like one show. So that's where it's like I'm not trying to spend the entire show dunking on Elon. But the issue becomes, just like 6 months ago, at least 10 million people were convinced that this dude was like the techno god that was going to deliver humanity from all of the problems that humanity created on a planet that basically gives us food. So like any of his solutions that he put forward being pushed as like this savior of humanity narrative have been exposed by experts in all of the areas he's claimed to be, especially like Neuralink, where like, oh, we're going to install a chip in your brain so you can play video games.
And it turns out that all they've been able to do is turn a light bulb on or off.
Yeah, and poorly play Pong.
If you want to call it playing Pong.
Yeah, and kill a bunch of monkeys in the process. So
that poor pig.
Yeah. No, they've killed like 15 or so.
Oh, I know. I think
and it's like
they had like a very low survivability rate with it.
Yeah, like it's a horribly low survivability rate for something that's an invasive surgery for nothing that like they have no proof of concept that it's actually use of anything useful except compromising the integrity of your skull and potentially creating a place for infections to fester. That's all that Neuralink is actually good for right now. Literally. And I'm like, I wish I was exaggerating.
I mean, is it even running off of like biothermal or bioelectric signaling? Is it powered by the body? Probably not.
I don't think so.
Because that would actually be kind of cool.
They had a battery in it.
If it has a battery, that's even worse.
Yeah,
if it can't be powered by the human body, then what's the point?
The way that I like the ones that I saw, it looked like there was a battery with like inset into the chip.
Oh man.
Surrounded by like a small silicate looking.
And then they have to put like some magnetic induction charger on the poor animal's skull at night to recharge the battery so it doesn't like shut down and kill the thing.
I mean, I'm sure he was probably pushing this as like, oh, in phase 2, people will be able to wirelessly charge while they sleep.
Great.
And making it sound cool.
Yeah, you
gotta sleep
with your head on an induction coil. That's fucking smart. Fucking assholes.
No, man. But again, this is the guy who brought out a fucking guy in a robot suit to try to present the Tesla bot and hasn't delivered a goddamn thing.
Well, this is what it'll look like.
They haven't delivered one thing. And
man, at least Honda's Asimo can actually move and do its own thing, and at least the Boston Dynamics robots can do insane shit.
Yeah, they are saying now, just like with full self-driving, it's a lot harder than they thought it would be.
And self-driving is only going to work if all the cars can communicate with each other. And as long as there's some old-ass jalopy on the road, that's not going to happen.
And if black people aren't involved, black people are always going to get hit because nobody's fucking testing this light-sensing shit on our skin, which is why I can't get a fucking dryer to work when I wave my hand underneath it or to get the fucking automatic shit because they only test it on white people's skin. So every time they do this fucking full self-driving without any black people involved, it's just gonna kill black people. Like I said, oops, it's a bug. When they again, this is that shit that they design the shit around us and then make it seem like when it doesn't recognize us that it's us, not the system being flawed in its design.
What I find really highly entertaining about this is that modern cameras have difficulty just with black skin, and yet the police trust these bullshit camera systems that are operating well out of their actual focal range and designed focusing distance within that range. Like they're way out of the, yet they can identify distinguishing features on a shadowy figure. And
I hate to tell you this, but they've been lying intentionally the whole time.
Well, of course. I just find it highly amusing. It's like, yeah, on one hand, like, yeah, no. The most sophisticated camera technology that we have has problems seeing black people, and yet old ass CCD technology from the 90s is able to pick it out like clear as day, even though we've all seen those grainy ass images. And unless you have like an absolutely modern 4K like surveillance system or a 1080p system operating in the desired range, like a doorbell camera, like once you get past a certain range, there's no detail in those shots unless you've got a really hard edge. And even then, somehow that's like not as clear as some ancient ass CCD camera on a closed circuit television network or system monitoring a garage, right? The boldest lie that anyone ever told me about a surveillance system. I was in a warehouse and they said that the cameras were in the lights, and I looked up and I saw what I'm pretty sure is like a 5,000 lumen bulb, and they said there was a camera in there. And then it's like, yeah, maybe if they're using a fucking NASA telescope that you can point the image sensor at the sun and resolve data, but they're
usually in tinted glass.
Oh, I know, but
I mean, because that's like the shit where they have to have like so here's the thing, like
I mean I've seen camera systems for warehouse security.
But the issue is if they're like a national chain, they have to be run, don't necessarily have to be, but a lot of times they'll be run by a national center that will monitor all of them. So like when I worked at 2 different Starbucks, we couldn't control our own AC. All the AC for those Starbucks are controlled out of Seattle. So it's like they could look in our Starbucks at any time, and like they were the ones adjusting the temperature. We had no control over it.
That's when you got to put up a little chalkboard that says, okay, everyone act like it's excruciatingly hot in here. They'll turn the AC on.
And it's like the same shit with Best Buy, where it's like, yeah, they had cameras that could be moved in the 360-degree rotation and zoomed in and out, and they did have tint on them, and that's where it's because they do have like, but those we had control over. In-house, they also had national.
I've seen the camera systems that are built into warehouse like lighting systems, and they're not the kind of lighting they had was not that kind of lighting system. There's no way they could fit a camera in the kind of bulb systems they were running with and have that kind of output.
I mean, yeah.
I mean,
I don't know. I wasn't there, but I'm saying, like, no, I mean, I know it's possible.
I know what you're talking about, though. That stuff is, but a lot of that stuff is new. Like,
I mean, it was just like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and
it's not.
And our modern imaging sensors are light years beyond what was possible 15, 20 years ago. That's the thing. The lens technology hasn't changed. The sensors have improved. The sensors have improved so much that some sensors can see in like near absolute darkness, and that wasn't a thing 20 years ago. That was within the last 10 years that they started really being able to do that on a viable commercial level.
Well, and the issue is with like 5,000 watts of fluorescent, it's not going to be putting off the same amount of heat, even though it's putting off 5,000 watts of light as, say, 5,000 high pressure sodium. So,
yeah.
It's going to, like, if somebody has 5,000 watts of fluorescent, they might be able to have something that sits in there because it's just not going to get as hot in that area as if it was 5,000.
Sure. But even then, like, LEDs weren't there 20 years ago. They were still
right, but I'm saying fluorescents were, and they were probably fluorescents, and the fluorescents just don't get that hot. Yeah. Like, they can, but you can do like 5,000 watts of fluorescent, and it's not going to raise the temperature a ton, as long as it's like in a warehouse and not in a closet.
Sure.
Because I know I've seen like 2,000 watts in like somebody's closet, and it didn't raise the temperature at all.
Yeah. Well, a lot of that comes down to like lumen output and actual lux of the element that's creating the light, and then like how we perceive that comes down to the color rendering index of lamp itself. So it's definitely, there's a lot that goes into selecting like the lamps, of course. But my recollection of nearly every warehouse I've ever been in, it's like these are just some high intensity, just illuminate everything and give you a headache if you stare at it for too long kind of situation.
Well, but they might not be soft.
Yeah,
lights.
No.
That's the difference. Is like even non-soft lights can still not get extremely hot if they are.
Yeah.
The certain type of filament, or again, like,
yes, it comes down to the technology.
The tube, like
I've got some photography bulbs that have like, they are 800 lumen, and they're huge. They're like a 200 watt equivalent, incandescent equivalent light bulb, but they only require like 40 watts or something like that. And they're insanely bright, but they also get really hot. Like, not.
And that probably gets hotter than 1,000 watt LED.
Oh man, no! I can't even imagine how little heat or how great the difference would be, because even my hottest LED for that I don't use has a fan. Even that thing, you can still pick it up when it's running, and it doesn't burn you.
Oh yeah, but it doesn't even get close to burning.
Oh yeah, but like the CFL that I was just describing, my photography bulb, that thing has a color rendering index of 98, which is pretty substantial, and those things get hot, like, and they're huge, like easily 3 times the size of like the CFL bulbs that were on the market before LEDs finally became viable. And these things are just gigantic, but they get so hot. Of course, I can't remember how hot incandescent bulbs got because I haven't used one in so long. And if memory serves me, those things would legit burn you.
Oh yeah, depending on the wattage, they can get up to 180 fucking degrees. Like,
there are some incandescent bulbs. I was at this light bulb shop in Seattle one time, and I was checking out the assortment of bulbs that they had, because they had one section that was for like photography bulbs, and it was all 97 and up color rendering index bulbs, and there was one section, the top shelf bulbs all have like 100% color rendering index, and lo and behold, they're all incandescent, because at the time fluorescents couldn't do it, and LEDs just weren't ready, and they were extremely expensive, and they were all huge. And some of them were like 200, 300, some of them 400 watt. And then I got into the flash bulbs, and these are like measured in watt seconds. So like 400, 600, 800, 1,000 watt seconds. And they're producing lumens in the order of like 20 to 50,000 lumens for that, 1/64th of a second. But it's like the full spectrum of visible light is being reproduced in that split second.
Yeah, and it seems to come down to intensity over time and space.
Yeah.
And it's like the higher the intensity and the shorter the time in the space, the hotter it's going to get.
Oh, yeah. Well,
effectively.
If you let it run for too long, the thing blows up because it gets too hot for the vacuum to contain it. Like the heat extends beyond the range of the vacuum bulb itself. That stuff's pretty exceptional too. Like very very rarely does anyone overpower a bulb because those things are expensive and you don't want them to explode. But man, our lights have come so far. Like I think I had an incandescent, one of those like Edison style old timey bulbs. I had one of those for a while, and in the winter I could use it to heat up part of the sunroom. And now I can't even imagine running anything that gets that hot except for like a space heater in peak winter. Because even our computers don't get that hot.
Like, I haven't had incandescent in so long that I forgot how much of a fire hazard that shit can be.
Oh, yeah. Well, if you use it all the time, then the dust doesn't have a chance. But if you let dust accumulate...
That's true.
Like the old school pedestal halogen bulbs, the tube ones. I remember those things when I was a kid, like in high school. I remember those things, like every so often some bug would die up there and the lamp would be on and then poof, there'd be like a flame coming off of it. And then the bulb would die because it got too hot. Kids these days don't know how good they got it. They don't have fire hazards that they rely on for reading lights.
But at that, I was reflecting on how it's funny how there's no real room for public outburst or poor public presentation without the possibility of being recorded. So it's like, on the one hand, everybody's either on their best behavior or getting clowned on the internet eventually.
Yeah. You know, I was just reading about how people born from like 1980 through 1983, and there's some spill on both ends, of course, grew up during either the at the end of the no cameras everywhere emergence of technology, or at like their cameras are starting to appear everywhere now window before the, and it's like right at the beginning of the millennial generation where this occurs. And so there's this weird window of people who did not have cameras during their prime teenage and early adult years. And their behavior was not recorded as thoroughly because not everyone transferred film to digital. And digital cameras were not ubiquitous. Like even the what we would consider to be just a point and shoot, like a cheap camera now, those things were fucking expensive at one point. Like I remember a 4.7 megapixel Fuji digital camera that I used during a photography class at IU. That thing was not cheap. And by today's standards, it's like it's nothing to write home about. It doesn't even come up like to half of what everyone's cell phone camera has on the front main camera. And, you know, we just happen to exist during this period. I'm not sure what it must be like for kids today who are under not just constant surveillance, because we live under a state of constant surveillance now too. But as kids, I wonder if the incidence of dumb shit has gone down. I don't think it has.
I mean, but that's the issue, is like maybe the lack of video made it seem like there was less than it was.
That's a good point.
I think the exposure bias becomes the problem in the framing. It's like, well, the 50s sucked for anybody who wasn't a white male. But if you just look at media, you think the 50s were fucking the best time ever. The greatest generation.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at the media from the 50s, it's only white people experiencing success. So.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, that is not a trustworthy representation, but that's the only thing you can see. Like they clearly covered up all their atrocities, and now they're trying to make it impossible for their grandchildren to learn about what they were doing because they're still fucking alive. So that's where
even with a lack of data, like I don't know. Maybe so if the number of incidents hasn't gone down, surely like the type of stupidity has become more stupider. I mean, we've got Tide Pod challenges, and what was there's another one that where people were like the lug nut challenge, and just people doing dumb shit. Did people do that 40 years ago? Surely they did.
I mean, they did shit like key parties and like would do cocaine on toilets and bathrooms at Club Studio 54 and stupid dumb shit like that. Those were the days. Like, motherfucker, you created COVID in a club bathroom because you couldn't keep your libido in check, like to save it for an actual bedroom or I don't know. You know, the way that like people were definitely doing crazy shit with cocaine, like they have no business talking about anything, like straight up. Anybody alive during the cocaine era should just shut the fuck up about kids. Like they all did some fucked up shit that if anybody pressed them about it, they'd be like, well, there's no pictures, so you can't prove it. And that's exactly the point. They all did some dumb cocaine shit that because there weren't pictures, they felt compelled to do it, which is this whole exposure bias. They can act like they didn't do that shit. We all know the truth. We all know they were all doing fucking cocaine because they'll make movies about it and romanticize it as if there wasn't a downside. So yeah, I'm not buying this notion of like people didn't used to do stupid shit in the same way because like
we just have proof.
They didn't have as much access to information than either, so they were even more limited in their worldviews and more likely to say some dumb, stupid, backwater redneck shit then than now. And at least if they go on the internet and say some stupid redneck shit, there's going to be at least a bot to waste their time back. Like, that's where I dealt with too much dumb shit as a kid before, like, because I remember I had a quote unquote friend who would like goad us into making prank phone calls, and I'm like, after a while, I'm like, okay, this isn't fun, but he's continuing to like use my phone to make prank phone calls. This motherfucker ends up calling the neighbor across the street, not knowing that she lived across the street
and knows because your number?
Bro, no, it's worse. They went to the same high school together. This dude knew her, had her number, because at that time they had like white pages. So anybody's number, you could just look them up and find it. So he called her fucking phone number, prank calling her house, not realizing that they live literally catty corner from us, and our parents know each other. So he leaves the vilest, most gross ass message on her machine, and then I'm like, who'd you call? And he's like, blah blah blah, so and so. And I'm like, what? And at that moment I knew I was fucked. Like, as soon as he told me who he called, I knew I was in trouble for something this dude had done. And this was where I'm like, it was before Crank Yankers. It was like there was like the not Jerky Boys.
Yeah,
the Jerky
Boys. Jerky Boys, they were.
So the Jerky Boys were encouraging this type of shit. So it was like
dumb.
This dude was like a couple years older than me and my friend. So we would like go to the mall and call like Procter and Gamble, and like so we would call Procter and Gamble and try to give them surveys like from public payphones. So this is like, in our minds, we're being super clever, and it is kind of funny if you're like, okay, like some kids just calling up people taking surveys and then trying to give them a fake survey. But then we would like call real people, just random numbers, and pretend to be Procter and Gamble, and then do the fake survey thing with them. So then it's like, after a while, you're like, oh, we were just bored looking for some shit to do. And then because Jerky Boys makes it seem like prank calling is fun, then we're out going to the mall using payphones. And eventually this dude's coming to my house using my phone, getting me in trouble. And then he's not getting in as much trouble because his parents are like, oh, yeah, he does this stuff. So it's like, I'm of the mind that I know by being stupid shit adjacent and then getting in trouble for other people doing stupid shit, that I know, like Ding Dong Dash, you can't do that anymore.
Oh, yeah, there are too many cameras everywhere.
Of course, exactly. You can't do Ding Dong Dash anymore. But people were doing that shit all the fucking time just for shits and giggles because they were fucking bored. So there's like always going to be rebellious nonsense, I think, because kids are bored. They don't want to do what the adults tell them to do just inherently. So they're just going to go do something stupid. And it's just whatever, like, is the popular stupid thing at the time. Like in the 50s, it was racing hot rods. Then you get the rebel without a cause driving over a fucking cliff. So he doesn't want to look like a weakling. Like, wait, what? You're teaching high school kids to act like this? And then they were.
Rebel without a clue.
Yeah. But because that shit got romanticized, that defined a whole generation of people who now don't want to let go of their stupid fucking gas-powered cars that can only go in a straight line. Yeah, they can go in a straight line really fast. That's cool, I guess.
They can only go really fast in a straight line for like half a mile, and then they have to completely rebuild their engine.
I guess. Yeah, I guess that's cool.
I mean, I enjoyed driving my truck. I don't mind performing maintenance or fixing it, but I'm not trying to make a hobby out of fixing the fucking thing all the time. Fuck. That's the thing about the racing culture that I couldn't ever really wrap my head around, is like the total commitment to constantly fixing the fucking thing. Why do you have to fix it all the time? Why can't you just drive it and make it work and not break it? Oh wait, I forgot. It's racing. They got to go fast. I was watching some F1 races, or some highlights from Monte Carlo, and that stuff's fantastic. Those cars are so amazing. They're just undeniably impressive. 1,000 horsepower, 0 to holy shit so fast that you can barely see it in slow motion even. And I've watched Monte Carlo from start to finish a few times, and it takes all day. And I've played numerous racing simulators that attempt to model or simulate Monte Carlo, and it's not an easy track. And watching these guys crash into each other, because the guy who's in the lead of the pack is like, trying to get through the interchange and make it through the next straightaway so they can give it the juice. And the person behind him is just like plows into him, and you see a car like ride over the one in front of it. And then both those guys are out of the race now. And I mean, that's like millions of dollars down the drain because they couldn't slow down. They just had to go faster. How many times can these guys wreck a car before the team fires them or says, no, you can't drive in the races anymore? It should be like right away.
I mean, I think it depends on how many points they've probably won with that team.
Yeah, that's true.
Like if it's a person's first race, and they're definitely getting fired. But if it's like they've won
consistently
500 points or something over the course of X amount of time with that same team, and they've already paid for that shit. Multiple times over. So I think you can earn a few wrecks. That's the benefit of like, if you drive aggressively and it pays off a couple times, people are going to be more likely to give you the benefit of doubt when it doesn't pay off, because they've already been paid to make it worth it. The issue is that person starts doing it too much,
but getting lucky a couple times isn't enough of a basis for modifying or sustaining a type of behavior. We all get lucky. I think during the non-camera era, people thought they were lucky just because they survived, or maybe they thought they had skill because they just got lucky and survived. But there wasn't as much of a culture of cameras that was monitoring behavior and showing, oh yeah, this is every example where the person didn't survive. So really, the likelihood of outcome or likelihood of a good outcome is actually very low. We wouldn't have known that before. We would only hear about the time that the person succeeded. I wonder how much of success is actually luck and not just skill. Just like, oh man, they just got really fucking lucky. But we can't just say that anymore because so much of it rides upon skill and money and the investment in this ability. But I mean, how many people don't make it through like high school without an injury of some kind? How many people make it through college without some kind of injury? How many people make it through, like, into adulthood without experiencing some kind of car accident? I'm sure it's actually like a pretty reasonable number. I bet the numbers for those kinds of things are lower, but we know that these things happen now because we're actually tracking the data. How much of it is all luck? How much of Elon's success is actually luck? And just happening to make the right decision in that moment. But it's not because of any like real skill or ability. It's just they got fucking lucky and they didn't pay the price that in that moment. Like in racing, they pay the price in the moment, like a lot.
Yeah, because the way that they present it makes it seem if it was a bunch of calculated decisions that got them there.
Yeah.
When we break down the numbers, it was clearly just manipulation of numbers in a way that people weren't privy to the manipulation until now. So that's why the manipulation is starting to fall apart. Like we haven't even heard anything on the Twitter deal in the last 2 weeks. There's just too much other shit happening.
Oh, they're probably suing his ass.
Oh yeah. Most definitely. There's definitely at least one lawsuit from one Twitter shareholder against him. But they might be looking at because by antagonizing the SEC, he has now put it on them to find him doing something that he's doing. Like if he hadn't antagonized the SEC, he wouldn't be in a position where his shit would be crumbling.
Holy crap!
But
so the market closed on Friday, and in that 5-day period before that, it dropped 19 points. In the last day, on Friday, it lost 9.22 points in one day. Like, it's down 18%, 18.7% since last month, 30% from 6 months ago, 41% a year ago, like to the day.
Yeah, it's not good.
But apparently it's up from their 5-year valuation. So
right, because
they weren't worth anything back then.
Well, they hit $1 trillion valuation, and that's when people were like, "Hey, you guys gotta realize this $1 trillion valuation is bullshit, right?" Right? And then finally they realized, oh yeah, they're not producing more and making more profit than Apple. So once they hit the $1 trillion shit, and he started like calling out the SEC, antagonizing them, that's when the shit really started like to come apart at the seams.
Yeah, $1 trillion valuation. That's just, I mean, obviously it was tied to Bitcoin, but
well, in perception, because I think they only even had like $2 billion worth of Bitcoin at the peak.
Okay.
And this is where their numbers are fuzzy intentionally, because the shit just doesn't add up. So it's like, where is all this profitability coming from if the cars are being recalled, if their Bitcoin investments aren't doing great, if they're selling carbon credits. Is that where they're making all the money? And then you realize, like, yeah, it's where Tesla makes most of their money. So they're a carbon credit company. They can't even deliver on the carbon offsetting. Even if you leave out SpaceX.
Apparently they only made 1.46 billion from carbon credits in 2021. 1.58 billion.
That's more than they made off of Bitcoin, because they only had like 2 billion in Bitcoin investment altogether. So that's what I'm saying. Like, once you see where the numbers don't add up. So this is where, they made more money off of carbon credits than off of Bitcoin. So how are they claiming this?
Apparently, SpaceX is only worth 125 billion. That doesn't seem right. I feel like a space company should be worth more than a car company.
If it was doing anything that made the process more efficient and more effective, but the reusable rocket framing as like being what the viable path should have been is like why they're using it for like satellite launches, but they're not using those rockets to take people to the International Space Station. Like they have a limited use in launching space cargo, and then on top of that, the space cargo market is like limited to the U.S. government. So it's the U.S. government giving them subsidies only to buy their product back. So it's like the U.S. government is pumping Tesla or SpaceX anyway.
You know, at least NASA produces technology that gets distributed across the globe. Why are we paying twice for this shit?
Because Americans are bad at math. That's why you get taxed twice. At least twice. Sometimes 3 times.
It's one of those moments where it's like, how does inserting a middleman bring the cost down?
It doesn't.
I know.
I wish Americans would just learn once and for all that adding a middleman literally never helps make anything better.
The irony, of course, is that Tesla got rid of the middleman and they're making hand over fist profits, apparently. But then they're entering space as a middleman. And, we'll bring the price of launches down.
Well, and then the whole anti-union aspect where these people are so adamant that unions are just another exploitative entity. It's like, some unions are exploitative, but not all unions are equal. So to paint them as if they're all the same is some disingenuous capitalist shit.
But any organization could suffer corruption from an administrative role. Any organization. There's no organizational schema that is immune from internal corruption. It's just that's like a fantasy. It's like, our organization is impervious to all forms of attacks, both external and external. Said no one ever who actually understood how that shit works. Like, if it was actually true, then unions and the people who were behind them wouldn't have been able to secure benefits for everyone involved and lay the groundwork for other unions to do the same thing. It's like if I can see how someone might think that unions are bad if they only read one article, not even an article, one piece of propaganda about insert corrupt union boss. And if that was the only union that existed in that person's framework, that limited type of framework, sure, I can see that. But that's also like, what kind of rock do you have to live under to be that person? Man, if the internet is 60% bots, then the internet itself is just a rock.
It's become that, yeah, for sure. A rock that shouldn't be looked underneath.
Oh, wow. It's like Schrodinger's rock. You're simultaneously above and below it at the same time. It's like on you and under you.
Depressing you while holding the key for unleashing you from your oppression.
Oh, man. Schrodinger's rolling over in his box. Or isn't he? Oh, man.
Well, and this gets back to the internally inconsistent logical frameworks that these people hang on to. Like the idea that the government given right to own a gun is what's going to protect the government from people taking it over? What? Wait, what? How? It just like if you try to think about it too long, it like might make your brain implode from the idiocy.
No, man, that's like that tracks along with China makes cheap, shitty products, and yet they also make Apple products.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Which are, as we know, like the Mercedes of phones that you can just buy. I'm sure that there are fancier phones out there, but you can't just find them. You got to go looking for them and go way out of your way to find them. But there's an Apple store right down the street somewhere. Or any computer for that matter. Almost all of our motherboards come from China, or maybe a few come from Taiwan.
Americans would have you believe that it's because the schematic was designed here and they just got a copy of it and they can just reproduce it because they're really good at that kind of stuff. And it's like, these are the literal constructions that Americans will use to reinforce the idea that, like, at the end of the day, we're still modern and Japan is still the most modern.
Well, you know,
because we can use that to divide.
If
Asian
Americans really wanted the best of the best American motherboards, they would be limited to like a very, very small selection of Intel and Supermicro server motherboards, not workstation boards that can actually be used for other things, but server boards that are designed to hook up to like, you know, multiple SAS backplanes or SCSI backplanes. And they're not consumer computing systems at all. Like, no consumer computer is going to have, you know, upwards of, you know, 4 to 8 sockets for CPUs and then 48 slots for RAM. That's just not a consumer computer. But that's what Supermicro makes. That's what Intel makes in America. What's funny is that China is building their own version of supercomputing that relies on more easily maintained hardware, and it's I'm sure they're nowhere near the numbers, like the benchmark numbers that Intel and AMD have provided, but they're doing it without having to require really, you know, really specific hardware. They're just like, why go through the extra effort to make it that much more difficult to keep running? Like, so many of our systems seem to be designed around complexity when they don't need to be.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that's like one of the problems with...
Is that like a tenet of American consumerism? Unnecessary?
It kind of is, and in the sense of the way that industry has made new items, the newest is the most desirable because it is, by proxy of being new, the most modern. So the notion of having the most modern and / newest is what's driving the perpetual planned obsolescence cycles. But that's something that came into fruition in like the late 80s, early 90s, and was not part of commercial computing until early 90s. And like when Microsoft and the Windows thing was like trying to push personal computers, because like the whole notion of coming up with the term for personal computer is because, as you're saying, like most of American computing was for commerce and at large scale, like supercomputing, because nobody really needed what computers were capable of. So there's this element of like, well, what would somebody who's waiting for their milk to arrive that they need on ARPANET. Like most of the stuff that was on the like Xerox PARC network isn't going to be useful to regular people, and then regular people aren't going to be working on Xerox PARC type shit. So for a while, computing is really in this like highly niche compartmentalized thing that is really not just if you're working at NASA, but really on something like large scale that needs automated calculation at some point in the process to make it possible to exist at that scale. That's what the computing was for until industry started turning personal computers into things that were meant to be a solution that didn't really have a pre-existing problem. That was like not the first wave of them, but it's one of the first. Like,
well, I mean, aside from games, I remember games and word processing as being like the big thing that personal computing was for the longest time. And then slowly, like, graphic design emerges, and then audio recording emerges, and then video editing emerges. But all of these things, except for even graphic design to some extent, they all relied on hardware. Like, to do really serious graphic design 30 years ago, you had to have a really advanced monitor that had full gamut reproduction, like real high bit depth monitors. And 30 years ago, you had to spend thousands of dollars to get a card to plug into your computer, so you could spend thousands more dollars on hardware just to get the sound into the computer. And if you needed to process it, you still had to rely on hardware. And it's slow. I mean, like, there have been, incredible like materials advances and breakthroughs in the technology, because now those things don't require all that specialized hardware. I mean, granted, you still need a camera to do video. You still need a microphone to record something. But the amount of technology necessary has been baked down to just the computer instead of all of the hardware. And that wasn't like, on some level, the really high-end stuff still isn't very attainable to just anyone. You have to be really dedicated, committed to saving, or get a recording contract to gain access to equipment, fancy equipment, or a movie deal, or something like that. But these things were still driven largely by, how can we make money? Gaming has driven consumer and mainstream computing development more than practically anything. Because if it was just like content creators who are working in some industry, they would be using high-end workstations only, and laptops wouldn't have taken off. Even the idea of a fancy-ass desktop, if there hadn't been games, it never would have gotten much bigger than like a word processor or a dedicated spreadsheet system. Games are necessary. Games are the most necessary thing for our modern computing. And especially now in like the last 20 years, all of the geological modeling has been done on low-cost gaming GPUs, because, lo and behold, a geology department can only afford to spend like, $1,000 for their computers, and you might have been able to get like 4 to 10 GPUs, and now you might only be able to get one.
Well, but that's why they innovated decentralized computing before Bitcoin ever existed. So that's like the Stanford Fold at Home and SETI and Boink have been doing decentralized distributed computing for decades. And that's kind of where like the technology isn't really new, but it's because of the inherent limitation of an individual scientist may have the knowledge to execute an algorithm, but they don't have the computing power. So giving the computing power over to the relevant scientists in a more democratic and open way was the natural way for science to sort of accommodate for that. But if you didn't do any research on it, you wouldn't even know it happened.
Yeah.
Mainly because it's like the way that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence was like taken seriously at first, and then it was like completely dismissed, is why they then dissociate any sort of discoveries they made at the time, or any sort of like advancements that were made during that project, like the big radio observatory, and I think it's like Puerto Rico.
Oh yeah, Arecibo. It just died recently. It collapsed.
But that was like one of the hugest accomplishments within the last 50 years.
I think it's probably one of the most significant accomplishments of all humanity.
But that's what I mean.
Like, period.
But it just got like
maybe
written off because of what it was designed for. Like because of the association for which it was created, it's like it doesn't even exist anymore because nobody wants to be associated with that failure or with why it failed. And I think that's like indicative of this success-based capitalist industrialist approach to science and creation of, like, again, the PC was basically pushed out before there was actual need for it.
Yeah.
In the real world, and that sort of lax approach to the PC is now part of the culture. It's like now people go to their most powerful machine to shitpost and find out like what dumb shit's happened today. Well, let me go to my super powerful fucking machine. This personal goddamn space computer, more powerful than Voyager 1.
I'm pretty sure that my workstation
10,000 times more powerful.
I'm pretty sure that my current workstation has the same power as the combined processing power of like everything they launched into space up until like, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago even, because I'm pretty sure that NASA was real big on using old hardware that they could harden against radiation. And so I think even like 10 or 15 years ago, they're still using the equivalent of like a Pentium 2 because it can be completely hardened from radiation. They're not even using modern processors. Like the idea of sending a Xeon processor into space is like, whoa, hold on. We don't even know what's going to happen yet.
But then that makes me wonder if they just got lucky because it's like these people sent up cell phones and astronauts with shit bags strapped to their legs, and I guess they kind of got lucky.
I don't think they got far enough outside of the outside of our Van Allen belt to risk damage to their electronics. But when we send a satellite 25,000 miles into space, into communications orbit, that's when we get real radiation. Like humans haven't been out that far except to go to the moon.
Well, and that's where I'm thinking from like my modern perspective of how much computing power I have sitting in front of me.
It's a lot. I'm going to tell the audience right now, it's a lot.
The idea that NASA would send human beings into space with like a fraction of this, it just feels irresponsible as fuck. Like those are some hairless monkeys just like throwing shit at a wall. I don't know, put this cell phone on the rocket. Maybe it'll go. Oh, the rocket blew up. Maybe we try this cell phone now.
Let's try this cell phone. Well, I mean,
here's 74 kilobytes of memory. Maybe they'll make it out of the orbit this time.
If Teslas are running off of a tablet computer,
but then they're catching fire.
But they're still running off of tablet computers. So if they're running a car off of a tablet, and then
but even that tablet has 10,000 more times computing power than the Voyager.
Yeah.
So even then, that car is fucking up on routine trips, and it's got way more power. That feels irresponsible.
That's so fucked up. That's even more irresponsible.
Yeah. It's like this history of white men being completely irresponsible with other white people's bodies is like justification. Well, we did it before.
Hey,
we'll do it again.
It worked in the past. Yeah. I don't see how it can't happen again, right? Let's just send a tablet into space. I'm sure that they've got tablets controlling their space program.
Let's send a monkey, and people won't care if the monkey dies. They'll just like think it's cute when we show them the first time, and then when we run the follow-up report about the monkey dying, they'll just put their heads in the sand and their asses in the air.
In Space Force, when the monkey ate the dog. And all that was floating around was the tail.
Exceptional Radio.
That's based on actual space history, basically. they streamline the story.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you.
Oh, that's such good.
Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Radio. 7 horsepower. Exceptional Radio. Engage bass drive. Digital modulation of genetic code commence.